All right, welcome everybody to the state of WCN for 2025. I want to thank everybody for being here. For those of you who may not know me, I'm Jean-Gaël Collomb. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the Wildlife Conservation Network. And first, I just want to say how much I appreciate all of you showing up today. This community really is the backbone of everything that we do. It's your commitment, it's your trust, and it's your belief in this mission and in the mission of all of the amazing conservationists that we work with and their teams that allows us to protect wildlife around the world. And so today we want to show you what you've made possible in 2025. We want to give you a glimpse of what's coming in 2026 and why your partnership matters more than ever. And before we begin, just a few housekeeping notes. So the session, I think, is scheduled for about 60 minutes, and we'll have time for Q&A, which I think you can drop in the Q&A portion of this. But one thing I want to note is you may have noticed that I'm joined here by my colleague Abby, and Abby is and I are actually going to have a conversation, and we wanted to structure it that way because relationships are really at the heart of WCN. And so we value that human exchange and just a monologued presentation didn't feel right. And I wanted to have a conversation that really reflects the partnership that we have with all of you. So I want to turn it over to Abby, who may have a couple more housekeeping items of how we can all interact with each other. And then we'll launch into a conversation. So over to you, Abby.
Thank you, GJ. I'm very excited to be here, and I joined the team a few months ago. I've been looking forward to this conversation. I know many of our supporters are eager to hear about this year's impact and look forward next year. So let's just jump right in. GJ, as you look back in 2025, what's the one message you want everyone here to carry with them?
Great, thank you. I think the message I want everybody to walk away with is gratitude, and it's probably really important to start there today. This has been a particularly hard week. As many of you know, we are mourning the loss of a dear friend and colleague, Dr. Ian Douglas Hamilton, and it comes on the heels of losing Dr. Jane Goodall earlier this year. So I'm just immensely grateful for everything I had the opportunity to learn from them. I think that's the right place to start, being grateful for all that these two conservationists and really more importantly, these two human beings gave to us, gave to wildlife, gave to our planet. So when I look back at this year, I see that same spirit in the commitment that this entire community has made. Many of you on this call have been with WCN for many years. There could be some people who are joining us more recently, but really the trust that you place in us is what drives everything. It is your commitment that really fuels conservationists on the ground who are often working in pretty difficult conditions. So I want to thank every single person for being part of our community. WCN really exists to bring together conservationists and supporters to advance solutions for wildlife and people to coexist and thrive. And we're grateful not just for the impact that that creates, but really for the human relationships that are at the heart of it. And that's partially why we wanted to do this discussion format today, is because, when people talk to each other, when we try to understand each other, that's when we can really tackle some of the difficult problems facing our planet. And that's how our conservationists work, and that is how we want to work with all of you.
Exactly. And that's a very beautiful tribute, GJ. The sense of community you just mentioned mattered a lot this year because 2025 was not an easy year for our partners or conservationists. Aside from the losses you just mentioned, we saw the tragic attack in Niassa and the serious impact of federal funding cuts. How did you make sense of those moments, and how did WCN and our community get together approach those issues?
Sadly, yeah, 2025 was a hard year. That's probably an understatement, and we probably saw that, most clearly with the tragic attack in Mozambique's Nyassa Special Reserve back in April for People who may not be familiar with it, an armed group struck the Mariri Environmental and Skills Training Center, the headquarters of the Nyasa Line project. Four members of their team were killed, along with five soldiers. Others were gravely injured, and understandably, the whole community was deeply shaken. But the team led by Colleen and Keith Begg, Agostino, and several others really showed unwavering commitment to the people of Nyasa who are at the heart of that ecosystem. And so in the aftermath, thanks to supporters like you, many people on this call, WCN was able to pass on funding immediately, and that financial support really enabled the Nyasa Line project to provide emergency support for injured scouts, for grieving families, strengthen their team safety, and keep some critical work going when everything around them felt very uncertain. And on top of that, there are also kind of these eternal challenges that we all deal with. Climate change continues to really shape people's daily lives. 2024 was the hottest year on record, and it's likely to be supplanted by 2025. And when I spoke with our colleague from Iwasa Lions, Janaria, he shared something that really stuck with me, and that is that people in his community in northern Kenya are moving from cattle to camels because the grass is disappearing. And that's really climate change expressed through daily lives, through people's behaviors, not through charts or articles people might read. And that also creates a sense of social challenge. When resources are scarce, when we're going to see more pressure on wild places, we're going to see more conflict. And conservationists have become not just ecologists or zoologists, but really peacekeepers and community builders. And sadly, on top of those, physical and social challenges, we also faced a major financial challenge with the federal funding cuts this year. Earlier this year, we actually surveyed our network to try to understand the impact of federal freezers from agencies like the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service or USAID. And what we learned was striking. About 70% of the organizations in our network were affected. That's 38 different teams whose work was suddenly put at risk. In total, we estimate about $14 million were frozen. And for many local groups, that meant 20 to 50% of their budgets simply just vanished or were inaccessible. But this community responded. We opened up our emergency relief fund, and people on this call and beyond helped raise $1.3 million just in a matter of weeks. And that allowed us to support more than half of the affected organizations. We were also able to tap into the wildlife funds and some of the reserves funding that they had. So, for instance, the Lion Recovery Fund issued approximately just shy of $500,000 in emergency funding that included grants to a group, for instance, in Conservation South Luangwa, so that they didn't have to lay off rangers or reduce patrols. The Elephant Crisis Fund also moved really fast and was able to kind of fill gaps for law enforcement as early as February, actually. Our Pangolin Crisis Fund awarded a critical grant to Save Vietnam's wildlife. And without that grant, Save Vietnam's wildlife would have faced a major operational disruption that would have really affected their operations, but also the lives of pangolins that they keep at their rehab center, because they would have been forced to repay several hundreds of thousands of dollars that they had already spent from what they thought was coming from the government. So, the grant really allowed them to not just keep the team employed, but also keep these pangolins safe and healthy. And we know that this support didn't replace everything that was lost by all those different groups,
Right.
but it gave our partners a stability in a moment that they really needed it, and I think it sent a very clear message to many of them that they're not alone, and I think that really matters to those conservationists.
Yeah, and I think no one can plan for all of that, all the challenges you just mentioned. And I think that's why WCN's model is critical.
Yeah, you can't forecast these kinds of crises, and I think you're right. That's why we exist. We try to act as this really paper-thin interface connecting conservationists dealing with all these dynamic and complex sets of issues on the ground with the supporters who have the passion and the resources to help. And so our goal is really to, let the resources, the support flow between these two groups as fast and as efficiently as possible. So we saw the value of that this year with the U.S. government pausing in its national granting. We were able to step in. The emotional support also that came with knowing that we and more broadly all of you here on the call were there for conservationists was really important. And it was people's trust and generosity that really also helped provide critical funding to keep some of the essentials going. So in this really volatile world, I think WCN exists to be this honest broker, a steady, a trusted partner who shows up when things get difficult for people.
Yeah, exactly. And then all of those moments are perfect examples of strategy in action, I think. And it's also a great segue into what support enabled conservationists around the world this year. And many of our supporters and partners started to hear more about this year about how we frame WCN's work as deploy, connect, and equipped. So let's start with deploy. You just mentioned emergency support and how else did WCN deployed resources this year?
I think it all starts with being agile. Deploying resources is our first responsibility. We want to move resources where they matter most. We want to move them quickly and strategically.
Mhm.
That's at the heart of us being an honest broker. So supporters, like people on the call, really trust us to make sure that their resources go directly, transparently, and efficiently to the conservationists that they want to support. And it's not just about getting the funds out, it's about making sure the funds get to the right place at the right time, because that is what leads to real impact. And I was really privileged this summer of seeing some of that impact firsthand. I was in Zimbabwe with our partners at Painted Dog Conservation, and I went out with Jealous, who's leading their tracking efforts one morning to hopefully catch a glimpse of what they call the Umkhonto pack of painted dogs. And I was sitting with Jealous in the car, and there's something really magical about being in the bush just before dawn. It's pretty cold, everything is very still. Jealous has this, quiet, yet contagious energy, and you just wait for things to happen. And then finally, kind of the sun comes out, it starts to heat us up. You start to see things move a little bit more. You start to see leaves move. You start to hear things, little yaps. And I just realized that these pups from the Encanto pack had woken up and were out there playing. And suddenly it kind of erupted in this joyful chaos. You would see these oversized ears of a painted dogs or paws kind of jumping through the bush. And it was a real surge of joy, of hope to see these animals um, being alive, being themselves. And Jealous really made sure that I knew what I was seeing, just that I was aware of how far they had come, because this particular pack was just 6 dogs about 3 years ago, and now there are 22 dogs. But the challenge is that when this pack decided to den to have their pups, they picked a landscape that was really riddled with poaching threats, and it was probably one of the most dangerous places that they could have chosen. And yet, that's where they went. So the team at Painted Dog Conservation didn't hesitate. They leapt into action. They identified all the potential dangers and they moved heaven and earth to make sure that there was around the clock protection surrounding that den. So as I sat there watching these pups play, I just realized that what I was seeing wasn't just a moment of joy and fun amongst these dogs. It was actually a real moment of victory. It was a moment that had been willed into existence by the commitment of so many people, people on the Painted Dog Conservation team, but also all of your support, because it's your support that made that moment possible. So it was very moving to kind of think about this and think about the impact that deploying resources can have for wildlife.
Yeah, I think that's a really remarkable work and a precious moment for you to see all the commitment goes into real action. And of course, this need to continue. Emergency support is very critical, but deploy also represents our long-term commitment to moving resources more strategically.
Yeah, deploying really is about scale. And I think that scale actually starts with gratitude. As of today, thanks to the generosity of people on the call and throughout our community, we've raised about $37 million across all our conservation programs. And we know that, the next 2 weeks are really big weeks for giving. And so we hope that continued support will really enable us to reach our aim to deploy about $45.6 million by the end of the year across all of our conservation programs. But it isn't just about the money. It's really about what that support enables because that support translates into real impact, real progress. For instance, the Rwanda Wildlife Conservation Association, which just celebrated its 10th anniversary, had a big win this year. Their annual census counted 1,245 gray-crowned cranes, and that's a remarkable increase from just 487 gray-crowned cranes in their first census back in 2017. In Borneo, Hutan and Suratuatai, two of our partners, saw the Kenambatangan floodplain designated as a UNESCO Biosphere Reserve. Now that really validates decades of community-led work to protect orangutans, pygmy elephants, many other species, and it really secures that landscape for the long term. And in Peru, spectacle bear conservation, using some funding from WCN's Shared Landscape Fund, purchased a private land parcel called Calicontro, and that purchase permanently protects about 5,000 acres of critical bear habitat. And if we move over to our wildlife funds, they're also hitting new heights. So the Lion Recovery Fund is hoping to have granted a record $10 million worth of grants this year. And beyond that money, they launched a really massive lion survey program to try to understand exactly how populations are doing. So they have about 25 different surveys in different countries, which is really helpful in terms of assessing what's working and what's not working. On our side, we were also really excited this year to launch the Sea Otter Fund back in April. And our goal there is to try to build this major effort for coastal ecosystems. And just the past few months, I think we've been able to issue several hundreds of thousands of dollars of grants to 5 different organizations across California, Oregon, and Washington. And those grants are really funding kind of critical science and meaningful community engagement that we really need at this point to navigate what sea otter recovery is going to look like along the West Coast.
Well, speaking of what, I really want to share a personal moment and highlight with you. It was when I see the sea otters in Monterey Bay around Alcorn Slough. And also I met Jen Miller, the new senior manager of the Sea Otter Fund. She actually organized a few field trips during our partner network workshop sessions. And that experience offered such a unique chance, allow us to see sea otters in real life.
Yeah, I'm really glad you got to experience that. I think it's really powerful to see these animals in their ecosystem, in their habitat. That's one of the ways that I think we really connect the work with all of us. And I think we were able to do this at the workshops with conservationists, and that was right after the expo, which I think was your first expo, Abby, right?
Yeah, it was my first expo. I joined the team in September, and then I joined my team in San Francisco for my first expo. That was the other highlight of this year I actually wanted to mention because I was able to meet so many conservationists and our supporters in one place. I think that really shows another strength that WCN brings uniquely to the field. We connect to people. So let's talk about that. How did WCN connect conservationists and supporters this year?
Connection really is the heartbeat of what we do. This year we held several convenings to help everybody feel part of this wider community. On the conservation side, one of our highlights, which I was fortunate enough to attend while I was in Zimbabwe, was the Lion Footprint Forum, which was sponsored by our partner at Disney as part of a Protect the Pride campaign. And so that forum brought together about 100 or so conservationists and community leaders from about 30 different organizations across Africa that had received funding from the Lion Recovery Fund, but several of them also had received funding from some of the other wildlife funds of WCN. And the theme of the meeting was roughly people and lions. And it was really a working forum, instead of just having classic presentations, people kind of share their day-to-day realities of conflict and the solutions that they were putting in place for coexistence between people
Mhm.
and lion. And the energy in the room was really all about that collective impact, knowing that we can solve these problems faster when we learn from each other. And so that same spirit of relationship building also drives our work with our supporters, with our broader community. So I'm really glad you got to experience a Fall Expo. It's always a very special moment when we all get together. I think this year was very special for several reasons. It was just on the heels of having lost a dear good friend, Jane Goodall. So we were able to celebrate her life and see her legacy in action through all the work of the different conservationists. Um, and we also welcome two new partners to the WCN family, the Hirola Conservation Program from Kenya and the African Marine Conservation Organization from Cameroon. So I think for those organizations and all the other partners that we have, seeing our donors connect really directly with those conservationists is really what WCN is about. This is why we exist. And to make those connections also more accessible, we launched new spring events in cities across the United States this past year, to go beyond the expo. And so those spring events gave our supporters in different geographies, a chance to meet our partners closer to home, but also in a different setting. It was often smaller
Right.
groups, fewer conservationists, so it gave people a chance to have more meaningful interactions, and we hope that that will grow. So that's certainly something that we'll continue to do in 2026.
That's something I'm actually expecting to participate and meeting new people through those events next year. Um, we talk about deploy and connect, right? And both give us a clear sense of the scale and the relationships behind the work. But WCN's impact is also about how we equipped conservationists for long-term success. Can you walk us through what that looked like in 2025?
Yeah, equipping conservationists is one of the most important things that we do because funding alone is not enough. Real impact happens when conservationists have the skills, of course, have the funding, but also have the skills, the community, and the support systems that they need to flourish. So a good example of that probably comes from our Rising Wildlife Leaders Amazonia program. So the Amazon basin is obviously critical for global biodiversity and climate. And so through this program, which we run in partnership and with the financial support of the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation and the Fonseca Leadership Program at the Global Environment Facility, we're really helping build a new generation of collaborative leaders across the Amazon basin. And I actually had the privilege of attending their first in-person training in Colombia last year in 2024. And it was really incredibly moving to see these emerging leaders come together. You could feel the shared vision in the room. And my colleagues Nina and Laura, who run the program and who were part of the second gathering training that they held this year, shared with me how emotional it was to witness the growth that these leaders achieved in just this 1 year since I had spent time with them to this year's program. And so, we see this kind of across the board. Rising Wildlife Leaders alumni from our various programs are already stepping into senior roles in NGOs or government agencies or influencing conservation strategies or policies across entire landscapes. And building on that kind of leadership focus this year, we launched the Rhino Careers Cohort. This is a partnership between WCN and the International Rhino Foundation. As some people here may know, all five rhino species are under threat, and we need, the people protecting them to actually stay in the field because it's hard to make conservation your career. And so this program is designed to support local practitioners, providing them with mentorship and career guidance to reduce the barriers to long-term employment. We've done this for about 3 years now, and this is the fourth cohort, and this one is focused just on rhino. And the goal overall of this is quite simple. By investing in the people, we're securing a future where rhinos and other wildlife can truly thrive. And we're applying that same mindset also to some technical skills like wildlife veterinary medicine. So Marcus Hoffmeyer, who actually directs the Rhino Recovery Fund, but is also a deeply experienced and recognized wildlife field veterinarian, led some critical veterinary training sessions across Africa and Asia this year. That included mentoring teams on safely handling Sumatran rhinos, leading a veterinary experience sharing course with our partners at the Rwanda Wildlife Conservation Association, which are happen to be led by another extraordinary vet, Olivier Nsengimana. And so these efforts really build durable capacity because every vet who receives this kind of training becomes an expert in those landscapes that people, other conservationists, can rely on for years to come.
Right. Not very long ago, I have received so many amazing footage and pictures from Marcus in the field. And I'd love to see more of those. It's clear how we equipped conservationists to do their best work, but I also want to flip the lens for a moment. Do we also apply that equipped mindset to our community of supporters?
Yeah, that's a great question. The answer is yes, we absolutely do. Absolutely do. Hold on one sec. Yeah. You know, we want to make it as easy and as effective as possible for everybody on this call and our whole community to truly engage in wildlife philanthropy in whatever ways, at whatever level people can. So our goal is to ensure that, you know, your specific interests, your passions are fulfilled and that you feel confident that your support is having a real impact. And so that goes beyond just the direct connections to conservationists that we've talked about. So you know, my message to everybody on this call is pretty clear. Talk to us, you know, ask us questions about your interests. We're generous with our time and our connections. If you're passionate about a specific species or a region or even an organization, even if it's not something or someone that we're currently funding, we likely know who is doing good work there, or we could introduce people to people, and pretty quickly we'd be happy to share all those connections with you. You know, we're here to have any kind of conversations with people about how you can get further engaged, how your community can get further engaged. Maybe you want to better understand how a particular program works, or perhaps you're trying to figure out how do you want to scale up your own philanthropy, or maybe you have technical skills that you want to share. Let us know. You know, our team really is here to support all of you, to support your philanthropy for wildlife, and we try to organize some of those discussions in different places, but um, you can reach out to us. We're really available all year round. Just shoot us an email and we'll be happy to see what we can do to help.
Yeah. I like that you give us a great picture of how we equip our partners today, but I also want to pivot to the future. You mentioned that the urgency of this moment, the urgency of this moment is impossible to ignore. As we look toward 2026, what is the strategic vision guiding WCN through these challenges?
Yeah. You're, yeah, the urgency of this moment cannot be ignored. I think we're living in a time of really profound change. And in that context, I personally believe that wildlife and more broadly wildlife conservation has that pretty extraordinary ability to act as a bridge. You know, it is one of a few issues that I think can still bring people together across all of the divides and divisions that we have. So our vision for 2026 is really built around deepening our impact to strengthen that bridge. You know, we're focusing probably on three broad priority areas. The first is, as I said, deeper impact. We want to move beyond just measuring dollars deployed to the field and look at kind of the collective results across landscapes, across the shared network. Second is deeper relationships. You know, we want to double down on quality over quantity regarding our programs, regarding the conservationists we work with. So we want to invest deeply in the network we have. We want to give them tailored support to help them grow and help them achieve their missions faster and better. But that doesn't necessarily mean we want to remain small. You know, that actually leads me to the third area and priority for 2026, which is a broader community. You know, these two goals are not mutually exclusive. We want to maintain that high quality depth within our partners and the conservationists we work with, but we want to expose their work to more people. We need new supporters, we need new voices, new platforms to help fuel that really impactful work that these incredible conservationists are engaged in. So we want to prioritize deep quality relationships with conservationists and at the same time open the doors to a much broader audience and supporters.
Yeah, we definitely want to see deeper connections and broader engagement. It's inspiring to see how those pieces fit together, the three areas you just mentioned, keeping that work deep, but making the community wide. I'm sure our supporters would love to know what this looks like on the ground. Are there specific opportunities or developments coming up in the next year that you are particularly excited about?
Yeah, there are a lot, and maybe we'll get into more of them as we get through this. There are some from our perspective. We may even have other people on the call. I think I saw some of our partners jump on, so we'll see what we get to afterwards. Um, from our big perspective at WCN, first and foremost, um, I think one of the biggest opportunities is this global partner network. When we support our partners to be more effective, when we remove barriers, when we can tailor our help to them, they take care of the rest. These are some of the most creative, innovative, resilient, entrepreneurial people I know. And so if we make it easier for these conservationists to achieve their missions, they can be such a force for good. The second is probably the collective power of our wildlife funds, and particularly across African landscapes. Our fund directors collectively have visited more protected areas than almost anyone else in this sector, or maybe even in any single organization. So together, that group of people are an incredible resource because they connect ideas, they can connect successes and failures, lessons learned across borders, across projects. So in 2026, we expect to be able to leverage that expertise to really drive impact across entire landscapes. And the third is the evolution of our veterinary work, I would say. We really saw a tremendous reception to the veterinary panel that we held at Expo. And if people haven't seen it, I encourage folks to go and look at it online. And until now, I think we've had a string of different activities for to support veterinary work. We had some scholarships. Some of our partners had a mobile vet unit in northern Kenya. The partners were doing interventions with different veterinarians in the field. We had the trainings or the field courses that Marcus and Olivier did, that I mentioned earlier. But we saw such a response at Expo that I think there's an opportunity in 2026 to try to formalize all those different ad hoc programs into something more cohesive. So I'm not really sure what that's going to look like. But I think the opportunity is there to try to really amplify the impact and build that long-term capacity.
Yeah, I'm sure it will start taking into shape in next year. And the vision for 2026 is definitely ambitious, but it raises a practical question. How do we sustain this? We talk about WCN secret sauce, right? Deploy, connect, and equipped. But how do supporters actually strengthen the engine behind the work?
Yeah, I think that comes down to a simple distinction and characteristic of our funding model. 100% model for designated donations remains really sacred. So every dollar that people in our community direct to a specific partner or a specific program goes to really support those activities in the field. And that's the core of our deploy strategy, and that's not changing. But deploying resources is really only part of the value that WCN brings. So everything else that we discussed today, all the ways in which we connect and equip conservationists and supporters, that's the connective tissue that makes the network resilient. And that work is actually funded by more flexible support that our community generously gives to WCN itself. And so that flexible support is that engine. It allows us to show up for partners, to navigate crises, to build the systems that help them flourish, to organize the events when you could all get together to address your needs and interests as supporters and match them with a conservationist. So for those people on the call who want to maximize their impact, or that's even a broader invitation to our whole community, I would say in addition to providing your designated funding to specific programs, if you can, I invite you to also invest in that core capacity to invest in WCN because when you support WCN directly, you're not just funding an organization, you're really strengthening the entire network. You're ensuring that the whole remains greater than the sum of our parts. So thank you if you can consider that.
Yeah, before we wrap up and move to Q&A, what final thought do you want to leave with our supporters today?
I want to leave everybody with a pretty simple idea. So that all the things we talked about today works because it fits together. Deploy, connect, equip. None of these things stand alone. The real power of a model is when they reinforce each other, when we reinforce each other, and a grant on its own can keep a lot of things moving. But when you combine that grant with strong leadership, with a supportive network, with opportunities to collaborate, that impact becomes so much larger. And that only happens because of the partnership that we have with all the people on the call. The trust that you all place in us and in the conservationists is what allows us and the conservationists to take risks, to innovate, to stay focused on long-term outcomes, even when things feel really uncertain and are crumbling all around them and us. That trust is what makes this work possible. So we talked today about what your support achieved in 2025 from keeping some of the teams stable during the federal funding freezes to progress in lion and in rhino conservation. Um, I would even add, because I saw them on the call, your progress over the years has helped Ethiopian Wolf Conservation Program celebrate its 30th year anniversary and all the successes and the chances that they gave for the survival of Ethiopian wolves to new leaders that we're seeing emerging across Africa as well as across the Amazon. All of that is really because of the support you've provided. So none of these things happen in isolation. They all happen because you made that decision to stand with these conservationists. And so as we head into 2026, I agree, there's a real urgency, but there's also real momentum. I see it coming from all of you, coming from our community. So I want to say thank you. Thank you for believing in our mission. Thank you for the trust you place in WCN to steward that partnership. We don't take that trust lightly. We don't take it for granted. We're really grateful for it. We're committed to honoring it every day. And so we're looking forward to what we can accomplish together in 2026. And it's been lovely chatting, Abby. I look forward to also having some additional exchange with our community. I think you'll tell us how we can do so.
Yeah, thank you, GJ. I think that's a very powerful way to frame the work ahead. And thank you to everyone here for your partnership. So we're now open the floor to Q&A. So I will start it to, oh, we got a lot of questions already. Uh, um, yeah, we'll start some questions from our webinar chat.
Yep.
I think we have. Oh, I love this one. Um, so I know you have acknowledged. This is from Terry. You have acknowledged the loss of two legends this year. I think this is a personal question to you. What did you learn from Jane Goodall and Dr. Ian Douglas Hamilton?
Yeah, that's a personal question. I'm sure there are many people on the call who have their own lessons because I think those two individuals gave so generously. Um, I think that is actually one of the lessons. You know, I shared with several people in our community, but I forget where, that I had the privilege and honor of meeting Jane Goodall when I was just a student. And then later on, I was able to write to her. And I was actually looking for volunteer opportunities, which she didn't have, but she wrote back to me. And I had written to 150 different conservationists trying to start in primatology. And there are some people who never bothered to respond. And there she was, the most famous primatologist of all, taking the time to write me back her handwritten letter. And I wrote back to her again, and then she wrote back again. And I just learned that, if you take the time, you can really inspire people. And that was a lot of generosity that I saw her display throughout her life in many things, giving to our community writ large. And same thing with Ian. I mean, Ian is a really, really special conservationist. Always made you feel special when you spoke to him, and always carried that sense of hope. He had fought for so many hard things, and he never gave up. And he always saw the possibilities of working collaboratively with people. And so that sense of collaboration, that sense of, not blowing things out of proportion, just sticking to the facts and, letting your good work speak for itself are very important lessons. And of course, that goes beyond just the scientific breakthrough that these two individuals had for their respective species. So the list goes on and on of what I learned. And what's special, I think, is that it's not just unique to me. I think if we could open up the mic, um, there'd be tons of people on this call who would also share things that they learned. And that's how special they were. They just gave to all people. They just treated everybody with that same passion.
Yeah, I'm sure the next generation of conservationists will take the torch, pass on to them, and keep the remarkable work they have done for the world. So I've seen many questions coming to us about our donation, and many of them have expressed their gratitude of how quickly we act during the federal funding cuts. So this question is from David. Do all the various organizations have matching going on? Only some, or is there something that WCN has an overall match in place that benefits all the groups?
It's a great question. And I don't think that all of the organizations have matches going on, but many of them do. So you can actually find out more about this just I think about 10 days-ish ago, right at the start of December. We opened up this web page, go to wildnet.org/match. I'm sure that my colleagues are probably putting that in the chat. Yes, I see it. So you could just click on that and you will see all the different matching opportunities that people have. And it's a great way to get your dollars to be extended. Thank you very much for considering that.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing the information. Next question is actually about sustainability. So, how do you make the decision to include new partners versus giving more money to existing partners?
Okay, so that's a really interesting question. When we, as I said, most of a donation model is designated. So people can designate where they want their money to go to. So if we get money to go towards a particular program, that's where that money will go. And we will pass on 100% of that fund to support that particular program. Um, there are, unfortunately, there's more work to be done than what we can do. And WCN does not cover everything. And so when we can, we do try to diversify our portfolio of partners. Would it be sets of species or geographies that we can support? And so that's why we try to bring on new partners. It's also nice to be able to learn from some of the newer conservationists, and I think they make our whole community richer. Um, but you've seen there's been quite a bit of growth in the past few years, and that's probably going to slow down. We do have a pretty long list of potential organizations on the radar, but
Mhm.
we have no quick plans to like keep on adding a set number per year. We're going to see how we can resource the current partners and the current organizations also through our wildlife funds and the Rising Wildlife Leaders, resource them well. But when money comes in, most of the time it's designated, and we still often get people who say, "Oh, well, I want to support this particular species. You know, can you help us?" And we don't have all those species. In some instances, we can still facilitate it, but there's still a need, and that's where the beauty of WCN at matching people's interest with programs on the ground is really key. Right. Go ahead.
Yeah. Do you have a question you want to pick out from the audience, your
Well,
particular?
yeah, I see another one that came through about what is the 8% fee when I
Right.
donate? Is there a way to get around that? So, uh, I'll get to the point clearly. Yeah, there's a way to get around that. That's an optional fee. It's an opt-in typically, not an opt-out. So you don't have to tick that box. Um, but that 8% really is what supports the rest of WCN. It's what allows us to provide the all that connective tissue, that connection and equipping to all these conservationists. It's what allows us to do the due diligence of all these programs, get the money out to the ground, organize the expos. But it has always been, in our DNA to make sure that when people wanted to support a particular program, 100% of that donation could go to that program. And that 8% is in addition if people want to support WCN's operations and all the added work that we provide.
So we have a question from, forgive me if I couldn't pronounce his name correctly, Slay Hambiliki. He's from Zambia, and he wanted to find out if there's some of the works you're doing there.
Well, Sly, yeah, first of all, hello. It's got to get pretty late in the evening over in Zambia, but maybe you're not in Zambia at the moment. Um, there's a lot of work happening in Zambia, probably too much for me to rattle on here, but we have a number of so we don't have any partners from a core partner network in Zambia, unless I'm like wildly mistaken this morning. But we do have several grantees of our wildlife funds. Would it be the Elephant Crisis Fund, Lion Recovery Fund, and et cetera, et cetera. We also have, I believe we have a couple of people from Zambia who have been in our Rising Wildlife Leaders program. And in fact, we have some of our team members who are Zambians and based in Zambia. So if you have particular questions, maybe reach back out to us offline, or maybe we have your contact and our colleagues from Zambia can reach back out to you. If you have an interest in a particular species, we can make sure that gets connected. But yes, we have active programs in Zambia.
I remember Jasmine, the fund manager for Pangolin Crisis Fund and Rhino Recovery Fund are based in Zambia.
That's right. So
Yeah.
Jasmine, our team member who works on pangolins and rhinos in Zambia, and Bwalia, who oversees our career program. This
Right.
rhino career cohort that I mentioned. Bwalia runs that, and she's based in Zambia.
Yeah, I would like to take you to the next question from Isa. Does WCN have any sort of document that shows conservation priorities that will help supporters and donors to pick the best option of their choice?
It's a great question. I'm afraid to say no, probably not in the format that you might be expecting. We stand behind the work of all of our partners and of all of our wildlife funds. So I know that it can be overwhelming. We do have a way on our website to kind of filter through different approaches if people want to see different approaches. If they, for instance, are particularly keen to see which organizations, so you could filter down and say you just want to focus on Africa, or you just want to focus on Latin America, or you want to focus on organizations that have gender type programs or anti-poaching. So there are all these different filters that can make the choices easier. If you really want to talk about the areas of greatest needs, that's when reaching out to us one-on-one becomes more necessary because things are just so dynamic and things change quickly. Somebody's ecological, social, political situation might change, or a funding situation might change. So somebody might have just gotten a big contribution and somebody else may not have. And so it's hard to capture all that in a document that quickly becomes out of date. So if you have very specific questions, reach out to us and we're happy to try to help.
Yeah. And I personally like these questions a lot. And then when I joined WCN, this helped me understanding the structure. So this is from Michelle. And she asked, Will some villages currently supported through conservation funding be self-sustaining one day? Does WCN foster self-sustaining practices?
Yeah, that's a fascinating question. It probably goes beyond the time that we have allotted. So let me just back up a little bit. Um, most of the conservation programs that we support really take a strong community-based and community-led approach. And in many instances, that means that conservationists really work closely with communities organized in villages or various other structures. Um, I don't think that any of those particular administrative units, villages, or communities should be self-dependent on conservation funding. I think it's unfair to expect conservation to be the sole source of livelihood and sustainability for these groups. But these are really complex questions, and the conservationists we work with have deep ties into these communities. And so they address this themselves at different levels. And they really do care about what the needs and aspirations of those community members are and how that can be addressed over time. Oftentimes, many of the conservationist teams are part of those communities, so they have that self-interest in that sustainability. Um, but it takes different ways to achieve that. It's not something that we at WCN itself tackle. We really trust each of the conservation organizations we work with to be addressing that at their level. We're too far removed to really take on that kind of complexity. But we trust that our partners, because we've carefully vetted them, are the right people working at the right place, at the right time, with the right approach to really make sure that those solutions are put in place for people and wildlife to coexist and thrive in the long term.
Yeah, I think that's just demonstrate our strength as a network. And I got another question related to just that about the global partnership network. And this question is about removing barriers so partners can be even stronger force for good. So what's the one example of a barrier you're most focused on removing in the next 12 months?
Yeah,
And
there are a lot of them. You know, one barrier this year, for instance, was that suddenly organizations that were expecting funding from US government lost that funding. And they had things in place, they may have had commitment. In some cases, that funding is even structured in such a way that the government will reimburse after expenses have been incurred. So some of these things were already deployed by conservationists. So suddenly that's a real financial barrier when that disappears. So we were able to help in some regards. So that's one barrier. But another barrier, I think, is visibility. So I think it's really difficult for some of these conservation organizations to stand above the noise, to be known. So, you know, uh, who knows about some of these more obscure species? And no offense to any of them, but some people may not know that Hirola antelopes in northern Kenya are endangered, or that there are only 400 or so Ethiopian wolves left in the world, or that cotton-top tamarins are also critically endangered with less than 3,000 of them, or that Grevy's zebras are like a different species than the more common plain zebras. And so WCN can kind of shine a light on not just those species and needs, but also that there are actual fantastic people and great organizations working, making real difference for the future of those species. And it's hard for those of us who care about these animals to know which organizations are working, which ones are effective, how to get money straight to them. In many other instances, if you Google, you find larger organizations, you're not always sure how your money gets out to the ground. But through WCN, you could say, hey, I want to donate specifically um, to Hutan in Malaysia or to protect Ethiopian wolves, as I mentioned. Somebody's going to get upset with me because I'm getting stuck with the same species in my head. But there are many different species. It could be the rhinos or the sea otters, and we'll guarantee that 100% of that goes out there. And I think that's really important to use us as a platform to remove that barrier of of access and visibility that conservationists have to have access to all of you, and that you all have to have access to all of that.
Yeah, I noticed that we have 4 or 5 minutes left in this session, so I can squeeze in maybe two more questions, if you don't mind. So next one I have is from someone says about land purchasing, and now I have lost track of that question. Um, yes, so from Monica actually, will there be specific efforts, programs to purchase land to save endangered habitats?
There is. So Monica, reach out to us. We're happy to do that. We are trying to raise and deploy over $4 million through our Shared Landscapes Fund, and we have kept that mostly quiet because we're trying to build up the capacity of that fund, so it's not fully public. Um, but if you have a particular interest in helping conservationists secure lands, um, reach out to us, and we are happy to take in a donation for the Shared Landscape Fund. That's what enabled Spectacle Bear Conservation to acquire this Calicontro parcel. The Rwanda Wildlife Conservation Association's also been able to acquire land. We have another partner in Ecuador who's down that path, and we have several others. So we can help facilitate that. If you're also aware of some of our specific partners trying to make these purchases, you could also work with them. Um, Another one that comes to mind, I know that the Macaw Recovery Network has also been involved in such acquisition. Of course, Proyecto TT has in the past in Colombia. So there are efforts, and we are happy to help. It's just not as easily accessible on our website. So reach out to us, and thank you for asking.
And the last one, I believe this is very important too for people who wanted to get into wildlife conservation. So, scholarships. I'm currently looking to apply for a PhD program in wildlife management. Do you have any program that I can be involved in or recommendations?
Uh, Short answer, there's a lot of parameters to that. Yes, we have a scholarship program. Again, look on our websites for the eligibility criteria. They're open to local nationals working within their region. They have to be sponsored or mentored, to be nominated or mentored by local conservationists. And you'll find a lot of information about that on our website. And our team can also help walk you through. It's a fantastic career. I wish you luck. It's a long journey, but a very rewarding one. So I am delighted to end on this note of hope that people want to dedicate their life to wildlife and wildlife management. Thank you for that contribution. It's speaking from experience, I can only say that it's been an honor of a lifetime to be able to work in with wildlife and to work with all the people I've met through that.
Yeah, thank you so much. And we've seen all the comments and more questions poured in. Please make sure you reach out to us and then check our website, and our team are more than happy to share more resources. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful end of year and a happy new year.